Reddit, Humans F Yeah. World War Xen. Posted by user PodgeWriter. When the virus first took hold, we thought we could contain it ourselves. After all, we were the Zentrasi, renowned across the spiral arm for our mastery of thinking machines, our skill with contained plasma weaponry, not to mention our industrial-scale production of the FEPs and rings used in the expansion of the gate system. We thought we could contain it, but we didn't understand. The first cases were outside the major cities. We had never seen anything like it. Our frontline medical staff all required immediate psychological treatment to help them cope with the reality of the infection, which in the early days proved almost as burdensome to our healthcare system as the treatment of those afflicted with the virus itself. We had doctors and nurses fleeing their posts daily, and suicides became common more quickly than I would have thought possible. All involved in the treatment of the infected, from healthcare professionals to military personnel, were placed under extreme mental stress. I say treatment, but in reality there was little we could do. Those infected would first lose their proprioception, causing them to bang into things without meaning to. The first signs of a new cluster of infected was often an uptick in the number of minor injuries being treated at an accident and emergency center. Later, sufferers would lose their vision, and then more important senses such as hearing and untranslatable. Finally, coma would ensue, followed by death within a few days. If that were all, it would have been a tragedy. But the disease did not stop there. When we finally requested the help of our local allies and mercenaries, the initial response was promising. We had hoped that outsiders would be less prone to the mental panic caused by seeing the infected. But when those early recruits came into contact with the enemy, most fled immediately, or demanded exorbitant sums just to help with the evacuation, or simply bombed their target mission areas from the air, killing uninfected civilians and destroying our infrastructure and our culture. In a climate of increasing panic, we swallowed our pride and turned to the Galactic Council itself. We reminded them of all that the people of Xen had done for the greater galactic community, our contributions to the Gate Project, our vital role in suppressing the Volume 2 revolt, and the actions of our Special Forces teams at, redacted, the full records of which are sealed for the next 2 millennia by Council decree. We were assured of aid. A task force was assembled, outfitted with the best military units in the spiral, health professionals and medical technology from a dozen worlds. We rejoiced finally our salvation was at hand. By this time all those who could afford to flee the planet had done so, at least as far as orbit, and those who could not had been gathered in refugee centers across the greater continent. The task force arrived within a week of our request, a swift response, and we took this as a sign of hope. They took one look at our home world, at live infected subjects wandering the streets, screaming out for blood and, untranslatable, at infected mercenaries of a dozen species, and they declared it all lost. There was an immediate blockade, a quarantine, and the Council's initial promises turned to empty rhetoric. Of course they would help, in time, when this was more understood, they explained. It was unethical to ask other species to fight such an enemy, to risk contamination by a disease which had been shown to cross the species barrier with inexplicable ease, and which could be spread with as little as a bite or scratch. They took their armored shock troops, their carriers and their aid, and they used it all to lock us into what was now our prison. All this to watch us die, and of course to save themselves. I couldn't blame them. Not really, even if I raged at the time. Who would come to fight such madness, to risk being turned into a mindless dead thing, to perhaps even be forced to kill others who had been turned before them? Not I, nor any I knew. So it was not with a little shock that I noticed the first of them break through the Council blockade. I was stationed at our last interstellar communications array at that time, trapped planetside by the Council fleet and already driven half mad myself by the screams of infected colleagues just beyond the compound walls. They came in a banged-up trade junker that was older than some civilizations, held together with tape and good wishes by the look of it. They requested landing permission with codes that were months out of date, but who was I to stop a ship arriving at this point? They touched down on our landing pad, and I made it my business to be there to greet them. I wanted to see the lunatics who had chosen to die alongside the Zentrasi race. The creatures themselves were average-sized bipedal organisms, not so different from ourselves, but disturbingly lacking any sort of untranslatable. My TC informed me they were examples of a recently contacted species and a new addition to the community. They had barely left our home system, in fact, so it was strange indeed to find them here, a full 19 parsecs distant. I felt my hopes sink at this new information. It usually took a century or so for a new species to make any kind of impact on the galactic stage. The poor things were probably lost. I decided to try and get them off the planet if I could. The council were often lenient with newer species, but was prevented from saying as much by the squawk of an ancient translation device the humans suddenly thrust towards me, a device so old it mangled our language even as it translated the humans' words. The thing began spitting out words in an old dialect once favored in our capital, but now spoken exclusively by only the lowliest farmhands. This here the planet with the zombie apocalypse? It was then that I noticed the creature was wearing clothing of some kind. On it was depicted another of his race, but with one of his manipulators having been replaced with some kind of gardening equipment. The creature itself, I realized, was lugging a selection of similar equipment behind it in a cart of some sort, which only added to the ridiculousness of the situation. What plants did it mean to attend to here? I said the being repeated, more loudly this time, as though its terrible translation device could be improved upon by speaking at a raised volume. I asked, this the planet with the zombies? Zombies? I asked, unfamiliar with the word, and unsure if it was a translation error. The creature bared its teeth in what I was later told was a smile. Ah, so this thing is working. Yeah, zombies. You know, dead folks that get up and walk around again. You got any? Ah. Untranslatable, in fear at the very reference to the infected, obtuse as it was. Yes, that is correct. But please, you haven't the slightest idea of what they are. They are the dead of our species, loved and doomed and returned to a mockery of life. They are an affront to everything any civilized species could ever, but the creature was already walking back towards its ship. George, what did I tell you? That tentacled fellow wasn't screwing around. This is the place. Get the boys and unload the buckshot. Time to kick some ass. He looked back over his shoulder at me. Hey, Boss Hog, we owe you anything for the pleasure? What? I said we owe you anything for the use of the facilities, or can we just dive right in? I assumed he meant docking fees, which hardly seemed to matter anymore, as our currency had long since lost its value. No, I stammered. No fees. Just go ahead and do whatever gardening you'd like, friend. He was mad, obviously. I didn't intend to get between him and whatever he planned to do with those gardening implements. They came in droves after that, and it took less than a year for an influx of these so-called humans to clear Zentrak of the zombies, as Billy Bob had labeled them. I learned his name only after the war was over, and we were looking for him with the intent of erecting a statue in his, and his species, honor. In the end, he said he wasn't really one for statues. He just asked for a 6-pack and a ship to take him home. We gave him our capital vessel, the fated Light of Horst, and 6 of everything we could think of on the planet. He laughed when we presented this to him, but when his mirth was taken as unhappiness with our gift, he was quick to halt our offer of a second ship. He took what was offered, and left, still laughing. Since then, the old dialect the humans' early translators used has begun to spring up in the cities again, not quite to the pleasure of all. Humans, as it turned out, weren't any better at combat than most, but for some reason they claimed was cultural, but which I suspect may be some kind of inherent insanity. They simply loved fighting the risen dead. I can only assume it is an evolved trait, selected for in response to repeated outbreaks of similar diseases on their homeworld, a tragic planetary history if ever I've heard one. That said, I'd never call a human crazy out loud, and neither would anyone else I know. Folk don't take kindly to that sort of talk on Xen.